Welcome to the Q Podcast.
Q is about conversation.
If we're really concerned about ending poverty, we've got to be more concerned about creating justice.
Our cultural products as Christians need to both defy and resonate with the culture.
And God's doing amazing things. His church is expanding, His church is growing.
It's not what's the purpose of my life, it's what is the purpose that's been assigned.
Stay curious, think well, advance good. This is Q.
Some people would say, hey, look, it's a good thing that kids are using more marijuana because that means they'll be using less alcohol. And so there's a big debate out there. Are marijuana and alcohol economic complements or economic substitutes? So that means that, if you use more marijuana, we use less alcohol, or if we use more alcohol. And so the debate scientifically is really still out on that. It looks like in Colorado, the amount of alcohol consumed is not going down, while the amount of marijuana consumed is going up.
I'm also a byproduct of the 80s. The egg in the frying pan and the whole this is your brain on drugs, all the stigma associated with the plant. I'm a Christian, I'm very conservative, and I had to get over it. I had to do that through education. I looked at research and I studied my Bible. Did you know there are over 20,000 peer-reviewed articles in regards to cannabis and cannabinoids? I could not find book, chapter, verse that would tell me I was prohibited from using this plant to try and save my son.
Welcome to another edition of the Q Podcast. I'm Gabe Lyons, and so glad that you are spending your time with us, learning, trying to stay curious, think well, and advance good. Q, part of our goal is to engage some of the most difficult conversations. They're not the kind of conversations that most of us really feel prepared for or equipped to know how to even talk about. And yet they are the conversations our neighbors are having, our friends are having. We see people in media having them. We're reading articles about them. And in the case today, there's actually policies and issues that we're voting on, but many people don't know quite how to think about it. And specifically for us, we care about how Christians are thinking about these ideas. We care about how Christians are thinking well about the common good. We live in a pluralistic society where multiple beliefs are having a seat at the table. There's competing ideas about the good life and what actually leads to human flourishing. And today we're talking about something that has created quite a contentious debate around, should we be legalizing marijuana use? And as you know, there's a lot of debates on both sides that can sound kind of good. Like, have we over-criminalized drug use and therefore our prison population has grown so much that incarceration now has become a big problem because we criminalize drug use? Or should we be making this more available because it actually helps people and the medicinal qualities from the actual plant can actually do good for people? I think it's a perfect conversation for us to have today and to learn about from experts who've actually thought a lot more about this than I have, as well as have stories to tell about how it's affecting their lives. And so we're going to jump right in, and you're going to actually get to hear from an expert who's studied and researched and understands this. He's at the top of his field and understands it probably more than anybody who's researched this topic. You're hearing from the expert, Chris Thurstone, and then we're going to follow that up by you actually hearing a story of a mom who actually is now directing an organization to help families who have a child who actually needs access to medicinal marijuana because of the great effect that it's having on their children. And then we're going to get to hear from both of them and ask a few questions and kind of press into what we hear. So I want you to stick with us. I want you to hear all these different perspectives. And so we're going to engage this, and you're going to get to learn and hear how can we think well about marijuana use. And so we're going to begin with our first talk by Dr. Chris Thurstone. Now, he's one of fewer than 3 dozen physicians in the U.S. who are board certified in general, child and adolescent and addictions psychiatry. So he has a very unique niche that he spent time on. You're going to hear from his presentation a lot of details. You're going to hear a lot of research. And I'll remind you again, you can go to qideas.org and you can actually see this talk and you can see some of the charts that he's going to reference. But try to follow along, because at the end of this 9-minute talk, you're then going to get to hear from the mother of a child who's experienced great results from having access to medicinal marijuana. So let's listen in.
So again, I'm Chris Thurstone. I'm a child psychiatrist, addiction psychiatrist. I run these adolescent substance treatment programs here in Denver. And I do research on this issue, and there's been a lot of research to be done. So this is the title of my talk, just so you know where I'm coming from, why legalizing marijuana was a dumb idea. And I deliberately misspelled dumb because who knows, maybe I'm being dumb too. So I'm a scientist, I'm open to different ideas and different whatever the numbers tell me. Before we get on, scientists always talk about their conflicts of interest, and I think that's really important in this area because marijuana is now a $1 billion industry in Colorado alone. So yes, that's correct, a $1 billion industry. And so different people have different agendas related to this issue now. And so I get my funding through the National Institutes of Health, through Denver Health, through a book that I wrote for parents who are struggling with this issue, and then an honorarium from Q. So at least I'm being transparent where you know where I'm coming from. So let's see here. So I'm going to show you some numbers here. This shows the percentage of 12 to 17-year-olds in Colorado and then nationwide who say, yes, I used marijuana in the last month, yes or no. And so Colorado's in blue there, and you see since 2006 onward, we've been going up and up steadily from it used to be just under 8% to just over 11% now. And that's a significant increase. And the rest of the country has been staying relatively stable during that time. Now, this study right here, you may have heard of other studies that maybe say contradictory things. In my mind, this has been the most credible study because it includes kids who are both in school and out of school. It's called a community sample. Other studies are looking at just kids in school. And so kids who are using drugs are less likely to be in school than kids who are not using drugs, okay? So for me, this has been the most credible study related to this. Also here, you see on the up and down axis the number of youth that we're suspending and expelling from our Colorado schools over time, from school year 05-06 onward to 2013, 2014. And you see right around there, 2009 or so, we had a 40% increase, boom, right in 1 year. And then it stayed stable since then. We were hoping that was just some kind of anomaly, just some random thing. Unfortunately, it wasn't. That was when we really commercialized medical marijuana in our state. We went from about 5,000 medical marijuana patients in Colorado to about 120,000 in a course of a year. We had about 3.5% of our adult population with a medical marijuana card, and we had widespread commercialization of it with dispensaries and medical marijuana centers. And so that's what happened in 2009, 2010. We started expelling and suspending youth for school-related, drug-related offenses. I'm talking about a lot of numbers, but these are real faces. We're in 3 school-based health centers right now in Denver, and the one school where I'm seeing that has both middle school and high school, half of our referrals are coming from 6th graders now. So this is a real issue, and it's very concerning given that the data that we're having in terms of the possible impact of tetrahydrocannabinol exposure on the developing brain. I'm focusing mostly on cars and kids today, just in the interest of time, although this is a slide related to emergency department visits in Colorado over time from 2011 onwards. And you see that the number of emergency department visits related to marijuana has been increasing significantly over time as well. So what's the most common substance bringing people to an emergency department is alcohol. Marijuana is number 2, and it's been increasing in amount. And these are also some well-publicized cases of people consuming edibles and then having a very overconsumption experience. They eat, they feel nothing, they eat some more, consume some more edibles, feel nothing. Then in about 2 hours, it starts digesting, they really feel something. And there have been some well-publicized cases of people becoming psychotic and killing themselves or somebody else. And so fortunately that is a rare occurrence, but that's certainly we're seeing some of that in our emergency department, some serious consequences from over-consuming. And we're also seeing more young people, so children under the age of 12 accessing these edibles, brownies, candies, and having an overconsumption experience. And that's actually a medical emergency for toddlers. This is a study about cars here that we published from our research group, and it's showing the proportion of traffic fatalities in which the driver tested positive for marijuana. In Colorado is the line on top there, going from about 4% to now about 10% over time, while the United States as a whole, non-medical marijuana states, staying relatively stable. So Colorado having more traffic fatalities in which the driver is testing positive for marijuana. And so that's been a real mess as well in terms of determining who's intoxicated with marijuana, what should the limit be. A study just came out this month that the average time from suspicion dispatch related to suspicion of driving under the influence to the actual blood test is 2.5 hours. And so by that time, marijuana is usually out of the system. So driving under the influence has been a real complication related to legalizing marijuana. This has been one of my main concerns here. We know that commercializing tobacco, alcohol is related. The extent to which something's commercialized is the extent to which it tends to be used. And so we're seeing widespread commercialization of marijuana in Colorado right now. This is some of the advertising here you see for medical marijuana on the left. And then you see Santa Claus advertising marijuana here. You know, we have a billboard down on the bottom left, and this was a radio station. You have cartoon advertising, bright colors, sweet flavors. Clearly appealing to young people. And we've been through this with tobacco and alcohol, and unfortunately it looks like we're going through some of this now with marijuana. I do want to end on some good news here. So I think a helpful response to this is something that this group, Smart Approaches to Marijuana, is doing. And really what they're trying to do is find a third way approach around this. So they're rejecting incarceration, old school thinking about this as an extreme position. They're rejecting the, full-scale legalization, commercialization of marijuana, creating another big tobacco, and they're advocating for things such as changing mandatory minimum sentencing. We don't want to be incarcerating people for simple possession of marijuana. We want to promote compassionate access to marijuana-based medications that are really pharmaceutical grade, with zero, for example, THC content in them. So that's a group that I'm on their board of scientific advisors for, and that I think is a helpful solution to this issue. So with that, I'll finish. Thank you for your time.
Well, as you heard, there's a lot of information in this debate. There's a lot of research, a lot of things to be concerned about, but there's also some ways to think about this that are a little more holistic, to where we don't just say, hey, it's all black and white. And I think you're going to understand that when you get to hear this next story. Heather Jackson is the director of Realm of Caring. It's an organization that's actually making medical marijuana available to seizure patients. This is very personal to her. She doesn't just lead an organization, but she actually moved to Colorado because she needed access to this so that her child could actually flourish. Let's listen in to her story.
I don't know how often you have occasion to fall to your knees in excruciating prayer to your God. I had opportunity dozens of times every single day for the better part of a decade. This is my angel, Zakai. You can tell he's an angel, right? Because he has wings. He's laying in the clouds, mostly because of the cute little cherub. But his seizures started when he was only 4 months old. By the time he was 5, he had 6 different seizure types. He had succumbed to over 500,000 seizures. By the time he was 9 and a half, 17 pharmaceuticals had failed him. Every alternative therapy had failed him. And I was praying. I was praying for something to help my baby. He was incontinent. He was in pull-ups. He didn't know his colors. He couldn't write his name. He was receiving hospice palliative services. And in fact, it was my hospice counselor who mentioned a group of brothers that were helping another family of hers. And I thought, maybe this is our answer. Is God omnipotent? Is he all powerful? Some of your heads are nodding. You're in a room of Christians. This is a really easy answer. Except from my perspective. Is the same God who allowed my son to seize hundreds of thousands of times over the course of almost a decade, is he all powerful? It's a little more difficult for me to sort out, but we're going to get that question answered. So welcome to Colorado. You did know there were going to be a couple of pot talks, right? Lucky me. I was raised to know that marijuana was bad, that it was evil. I'm also a byproduct of the 80s. The egg in the frying pan and the whole this is your brain on drugs, all the stigma associated with the plant. I'm a Christian, I'm very conservative, and I had to get over it. I had to do that through education. I looked at research and I studied my Bible. Did you know there are over 20,000 peer-reviewed articles in regards to cannabis and cannabinoids? I could not find book, chapter, verse that would tell me I was prohibited from using this plant to try and save my son. July 19th, 2012, we gave Zakai his first dose of cannabis oil in a syringe, just like you'd give a baby Tylenol. Took about 3 months to slowly titrate up and find his therapeutic dose. Yes, testing exists nowadays. You can know the exact milligrams that you're dosing. You can know that it's free of molds, pesticides, residual solvents. And you can even use strains of cannabis like my son uses that are not psychoactive. The science is actually pretty incredible. So I definitely used to think medical marijuana was a farce, a lie, an excuse to get high. Now, through obviously my own experience in helping thousands of families, I understand that it's not a farce. In fact, it's a medicine. Sometimes it can save a life, like it did my son's. And often it can improve that quality of life, and that should matter to you. That's a relevant topic to the Christian leaders in our nation. How I make meaning of what happened to me for almost a decade is the Realm of Caring Foundation. And really quickly, let me answer that question. Yes, God is absolutely all-powerful. God used that plant right there. That's the exact plant they make my son's medicine from to save my son. So the Realm of Caring Foundation is a national organization. We're connected to about 25,000 families all over the world. We write checks every month, by far my favorite thing to do, offset the cost of a therapy your insurance doesn't cover. We also have to relocate families on occasion. So yes, in 2016 in the United States of America, families are having to uproot because of their zip code and get to a state where this is legal. And then they're hostage in the state. They can't leave with their plant-based medicine. We also conduct research with a small school, don't know if you've heard of them, Johns Hopkins University. I'm reminded of a sermon that my minister gave really early on. And I don't know what the title of the sermon was then, but I know the title that I assigned to it. And this is when God told Elijah, I need you to go tell King Ahab, there's going to be famine in the land, but I'm going to take care of you. You need to go out into the desert, go by a brook of Cherith, and I'm going to bubble up water. It's going to sustain you. I'm going to send a raven. He's going to sustain you. He's going to bring you meat. He's going to bring you bread, and you're going to have water. And God fulfilled his promise. And he sustained Elijah in that way. And one day, Elijah came out, and the brook had dried up. And my soul screamed. I had identified where I was. I was standing on the banks where there should be life-giving water, and my brook had dried up, and I was begging for God to give me a compass on where I was to go next. God sent Elijah to a widow. God is a trip. The widow was gathering sticks. She was about to make her last meal. She had a little bit of flour, she had a little bit of olive oil, and he said, I need some food. And she said, I'm gathering this to make a fire for my last meal. God will choose any means within his nature, and he'll do absolutely whatever he wants. And just as he chose a raven to provide meat and bread, and a widow who was about to die to sustain Elijah, he chose the plant to sustain my son. I don't make the rules. So I want to challenge you this morning. I want to challenge you as the Christian community to change how you think about the medicinal use of this plant. I want to challenge you to change how you think, especially about the people who are using this plant. I want you to change the mood in your Christian environment. And maybe that's on a small scale. Maybe that's a dinner conversation with your immediate family, and you can tell them about Heather and Zakai. Or maybe that's a bigger, broader conversation that happens in Sunday school or at a small group discussion. But I challenge you to consider the case for Christian compassion, because we are to carry one another's burdens. And this, my friends, is how we fulfill the law of Christ. Thank you so much for your time this morning, and I especially thank you for your open heart.
I want to invite you to come out Friday night to watch the film Silence. It's an incredible film by Martin Scorsese. His movie is not only a magnificent work of art, but it's probably one of the most timely of all the Oscar-nominated films. Time magazine calls it beautiful and illuminating. Vox is saying it's one of the finest religious movies ever made, and even Paste is raving that it's one of the most richly layered, faith-driven narratives you're likely to encounter in modern cinema. Well, you can also win free tickets to see it Friday night at screenbrew.com, and we're asking everybody to use the hashtag #SeeSilenceFriday and just be a part of a new discussion. It's a perfect moment. We'd love for you to be a part of it, and check out more at screenbrew.com. Well, what a challenge from Heather and for all of us to consider, how do we think about these things? You know, in our conversations, it really does matter. Things aren't as cut and dried as many people would like to say it. We know that's true, but when it comes to some topics, some people are just immediately closed off and they say, no, marijuana's bad. Well, it's interesting when you even look at the states across the U.S. and you see how legalization is going, there is a divide in how people are thinking about it. There is the ability to think in a complex way about the situation. 28 states in the U.S. have actually legalized medicinal marijuana, what Heather was just talking about, whereas only 8 states have legalized recreational marijuana. Now, there's still a debate that if you legalize medicinal marijuana, it ultimately will lead to recreational use. And so now the conversation gets fun because I'm going to ask them questions that I think you're probably thinking right now as well. And the reason I know that is when they first gave these talks, we asked our participants at the Q conference to send in their questions immediately. And so they responded, and we were able to engage some of those big questions that were still kind of hanging out there, wondering what did they really mean by this and how will this effect really play out? And so I want you to think about joining us at our next Q conference. You see, Q is this place where we try to create an opportunity for you to hear from different perspectives, for you to engage some of these really difficult topics that sometimes it's hard to get good information on. And through spending a couple of days with us in Nashville, April 26 to 28, I think you'll find that the investment of your time and energy to be with us is going to expand your imagination, your mind, the way that you think, but most importantly, how you love those around you well by having good information, but also the posture of love and kindness to those that perhaps maybe you'll even disagree with. And so let's listen in now to the conversation I had once these 2 talks were delivered. I'd like to invite Heather and Chris to come back out and join me, and we're going to ask a few questions. So welcome them back. So this is a pretty practical question from Tanya, and there's a couple others asking similar things, but how has the use of marijuana reduced usage of alcohol or maybe other deadlier forms of drugs? So in some cases, are children using marijuana, is that better than binge drinking or better than other things that could catapult them? Or is marijuana a gateway drug all the time, and that's the kind of results that we're finding?
No, I think that's a great question because some people would say, hey, look, it's a good thing that kids are using more marijuana because that means they'll be using less alcohol. And so there's a big debate out there. Are marijuana and alcohol economic complements or economic substitutes? So that means that, if you use more marijuana, we use less alcohol, or if we use more alcohol. And so the debate scientifically is really still out on that. it looks like in Colorado, the amount of alcohol consumed is not going down while the amount of marijuana consumed is going up. And certainly among youth, we're not seeing the number of suspensions, expulsions, use of alcohol going down proportionately to the increase in marijuana use.
Gotcha. And just to follow up, a few people are wondering, what is your perspective on medicinal marijuana? Do you see it as something that there should be a carved out way for people to have access to that, but not recreational? I think people just aren't clear from us having both talks. Maybe if you guys disagree or agree on that.
Yeah, I think in 1999, the Institute of Medicine released an important report related to the compassionate use of marijuana-based products for certain conditions. And so I think there are a few physicians who would say there's absolutely no case where compassionate use of medical marijuana is never indicated. So I think there are certain circumstances where it is indicated and it's a compassionate thing to do. And my own thinking on that is that we are so close to having FDA-approved products that are based on marijuana, and they're real pharmaceutical grade. We know exactly what's in them. They're very pure. And I personally would support having access to compassionate use of those products. For me, it's not good enough. I think that people who are really ill need something that's pharmaceutical grade, that's very pure like that.
So, Heather, that was one of the questions Stephen Redden had. He talked about how compelling your story was, and his question was specifically about this. Like, where is the FDA and drug companies on providing marijuana-based medicines at this stage?
So currently, there is one pharmaceutical company that's using a plant-based, they extract cannabidiol, CBD, which is the non-psychoactive component of the plant, which is what my son takes. It's predominantly CBD. And they're extracting that, and they're in phase 3 trials for catastrophic epilepsy diagnoses like my son has. And then there are some synthetic companies that are creating some cannabis-based medicines as well. Research actually suggests, and this is how I stayed sane for a decade, by the way. So no, I don't have initials behind my name, but I've very much well-researched this, that there is an entourage effect, that there are over 400 chemical components to the plant. And when you use it as God intended with all of the chemical components of the plant, it could be more efficacious. So that I agree that we absolutely do need quality standards. What I will say is there are companies that are absolutely doing that. They're following current good manufacturing practices. Where I get my medicine, there's 16 biologists and chemists in that lab. And so there are safe options that are quality options. And then just one more thing. So I took all the test results for the last 2 years of the product my son takes, and the variance is 7% plus or minus, meaning milligrams of cannabidiol, CBD, per milliliter. And pharmaceuticals allow 15% on one end and 10% on the other. So it is a big misconception that you cannot get a quality product that's an artisanal product. There is bad stuff out there, I agree, but there's good stuff too.
And just a quick follow-up, a lot of people are asking about your son. Like, how is your son doing today?
You know, I got nervous because I've never spoken to a group this big before, so I skipped that part. And I'm sorry, because it's an absolutely amazing story. So my son actually was receiving hospice and just was, in really, really bad shape. Tonight, at the end of today, when he has no seizures, he will be 1,373 days completely seizure-free. So he hospiced to health, literally. He knows his colors. He's writing his name. He's riding a bike. He's climbing trees. He's scaring the heck out of me. So he's doing fantastic.
Great. And we have another question. Dr. Thurstone, he says, I'm a former heavy user of marijuana. And so the question is written like this. Dude, how much is big money lobbying the clouding of lawmakers, like it's clouding their ability of lawmakers to look at the negative empirical data? So the millions and billion-dollar industry that we can see around this, is that having an effect on the decisions around whether people are legalizing this or not?
Right. I think we have no hard information on this yet. We know that with respect to tobacco, very clearly there are studies that how legislators voted on tobacco-related issues was very much related to how much money they receive from the tobacco industry. And so that research has yet to be done with respect to marijuana. Certainly there's a very strong marijuana lobby right now in Colorado, and my own personal feeling is that I talk with people till I'm blue in the face about these data, and I am wondering why people seemingly don't care about it.
Yeah. Well, and I think, that's the hard part about, I know your work as a researcher is laying out data, and sometimes it's the stories that are way more compelling. And I think that's where Heather's story, I know you've helped so many people around the country start to see the benefits. There's one person who asked us from Texas saying, Heather, how do I get involved with my legislature to lobby for this? What did you find to be an effective way to communicate about this?
So what has happened over the course of the last 2 years, last week, in fact, Pennsylvania passed some medical cannabis legislation, and that was the 20th state in 24 months. So there is this rampant legislative trend that's been created, and many of those states limited the THC percentage. So very conservative states where, when you sit down at the table, you're not my state, sister. And they don't want high THC in their state. And I can certainly understand that. I think that what speaks is truth. And I think that what we know about research is that about 6% would prove the benefits. And I've actually talked with NIDA, and they said, Heather, it's the National Institute of Drug Abuse. We're not going to fund research that shows, that this is going to be efficacious. And so I think that what we need to do when we're legislating, and in fact, Texas did pass some high CBD, low THC type legislation for epilepsy specifically. And I think that we just need to continue to go back to the drawing board and expand access and add, other qualifying conditions that might have a good result.
Dr. Thurstone, this question is from Scott. He says, how are scientists accounting for the impact related to the rise of adolescent use of Adderall and neurological effects in this data? That's something you're seeing, and how is that being thought about?
So in terms of the effects of Adderall and the misuse of Adderall, I think that's a great question in terms of the misuse of opioids is a significant concern. So painkillers, we're definitely seeing an increase in that. Increase in stimulants and Adderall, ADHD type medicines staying rather stable at this time. I think that gets back to the whole question, economic substitutes or complements, we don't know. And we don't know if that's related to this marijuana issue or not.
Yeah, it's one of the things, this gives us a great thing. It's a great lunchtime conversation, right? There's the ethics, trying to work through ethically, how do we think about something where it has two sides to the story? It engages in political policy and lawmaking, and it also is affecting real lives, like the decisions that are made, as we heard from Heather's story. Heather, just the final question, just to be fair to Chris, do you support recreational use of marijuana?
As a Christian, I don't support anyone using anything that's intoxicating. So no, I don't believe personally that there's a place for recreational cannabis use. But just when you look at historically the war on drugs and how much money we've spent, and that there is this sort of path for alcohol and it is taxed and people abuse that as well. I think that we should consider that. I think that financially as a country, we should probably consider that because there's just as many drugs on the street as there was. People are not using less of them. And, we're spending a lot of money locking up mostly our minorities.
Well, thank you for both just presenting what you've been working on and thinking about. Let's thank them for their time with us today.
Thank you.
This has been another edition of the Q Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed getting to hear these different perspectives and conversations. I hope it's challenged you to just keep going deeper, keep asking questions, keep looking for information that just helps you be well informed. Today we have so much information. It's really hard to filter down. What should I listen to? Who's right? Is this fake? Is this true? Is this real? And so our goal at Q is to be somewhat of that filter for you, to help you as you're in your busy life and you're going along and you're driving to work, or maybe you're on a walk or exercising, that you'll actually have the opportunity to listen, to consume some really good information, but that you'll also be inspired to think well about how you're engaging today's culture. And so join us, as I said, April 26 to 28, 2017. We're going to be in Nashville, 2,000 leaders coming together to engage 35 topics from our stage and then many more in our panels and breakouts. But more important than that, you're going to actually meet people who share the same kind of vision you do about life. You believe that Christians ought to be leading in these conversations. We ought to be contributing to the way our world is viewing some of these really complex topics. So join with us and actually learn more about it at qideas.org/2017. That's qideas.org/2017. And you'll find information there regarding the experiences, the different panels we're doing, the after parties, all of the opportunities to connect with one another over meals and so on. And we're going to have a great time. And I hope you'll join us. I hope you'll bring a friend. But until then, I look forward to joining you again on this next episode of the Q Podcast.